Hi there guys, I'm just going to be doing a quick review of the DeathAdder V2 Pro that I got in recently. I had a DeathAdder V2 wired before this. I had the Elite and the Chroma before that. This one is actually noticeably different in certain ways, and in some ways it's not better than the V2, and I will get into that. It's possible that this is just specific quality control issues with the unit that I have. And it's nothing bad enough to actually return, but I'll get into what I'm talking about in a moment. I also did have the opportunity to use the V3 for a couple of hours. I don't own one of those, but I do want to talk about it because the praise for that mouse has kind of been universal at this point, and my feedback on that is maybe not going to be as positive as other people's. Don't get me wrong, it is a great mouse, but we'll get to that. But anyway, as far as the V2 Pro goes, so the immediate differences versus the standard V2, which I have in this box here, but they largely will look the same. That's the only reason I didn't bother taking one out, is that it's the same shape. It's essentially the same mouse in virtually every way, but you do have V2 opticals this go around. And I don't think they're a mammoth improvement from the V1s in the standard DeathAdder V2. I think they're a little bit better, but to me, they're a little bit better, but to me, in terms of their feel, the real difference is the actuation force required is a little bit higher on the DeathAdder V2 Pro than it is on the standard DeathAdder V2 that has the Gen 1s. And so the actuation force required to actually press it down and get it to actuate is a little bit higher on this one, and you get a little bit more feedback from the click than you do on the standard V2, where it's an incredibly light actuation force, and you don't get a ton of feedback. I don't hate these clicks as much as most people. I know a lot of reviewers have a lot, very negative things to say about the opticals. The Gen 3 opticals I actually think are fine at this point. Like, I don't like them as much as, say, the mechanical switches in like an EC2-C, for example. Or like the outsets clicks, but I think by the time you get to the DeathAdder V3, they're serviceable enough that it's not an issue, and I actually kind of like those clicks. I don't dislike these, I really don't. People hate on them, I don't dislike them, I just think they're not the best clicks around, and it is true in my view that other mice have more satisfying clicks. Like the Superlight has amazing clicks, EC2-C has amazing clicks. The Outset does have good mechanical clicks, but I don't think that they are as satisfying as the EC2-C, which just has, for me, like the ultimate best clicks in my opinion. But all right, so what's different about this in the standard V2? Mainly, you have these rubberized grips where on the standard V2, it is just under the buttons that's rubberized and the rest of the panel is plastic. Whereas on the Pro, they actually go all the way around, and this is much more noticeable than I expected it to be, and I think this feels a lot nicer. You get a much more consistent feeling when you're holding the mouse on the other side, and I like this change a lot. The scroll wheel, there's just something I can't put my finger off that's a little bit different about it. I think they tweaked it a little bit from the standard V2, which already had my favorite wheel. It's mostly the same. The sound that the click makes is a smidge different to my perception, but overall the wheel feels similar. I think it's a little bit quieter now, but it's a great wheel on the DeathAdder V2 line. It's my favorite wheel. I actually like the wheel on the DeathAdder V2 more than the wheel on the V3, which is really a totally different mouse entirely, and I personally don't think they even should have called it a DeathAdder, but we'll get to that. And that does have a good wheel as well. But what I like about the DeathAdder wheel is it's pretty quiet and smooth to scroll, but you still get these really defined steps, and the texturing, the rubber texturing they put on the outside of the wheel is really nice. And the middle click, it's isn't so difficult to actuate. Like one of my issues with the Outset AX is and some mice in general, is getting the middle click to actually actuate in requires just a tremendous amount of force. And I do prefer the middle click on the EC2-C because there's a happy middle ground where you're not struggling to press it, but where you still get a lot of feedback from it, and you're not mis-scrolling the wheel. I would say occasionally I do scroll the wheel on accident when I'm going to press this in. But overall, great wheel. And the issue, of course, of the EC2 wheel is that it's very, very loud, and it's not really good for browsing, I would say, because it's not a smooth wheel. It's very, very tactile. So I think for gaming specifically, it's a great wheel, though, and I'm a fan of it in general. All right, so what is different about this V2? Call me crazy. I had this and my standard V2 right next to each other, and I was doing my typical grip, which for context, I take the mouse hump, I line it to the base of these fingers, and then I kind of just align my thumb to the groove, and then I rest my fingers down. So kind of a palm grip, maybe a relaxed fingertip grip, which is exactly the grip where if you have larger hands, I think this shape is just unmatched in my experience, at least. Call me crazy. I was looking at the mice 3D shapes like ratings tool online. You know, so for context, this guy where you can kind of draw the shapes and all that jazz. And it looks like they're very similar shapes. I mean, really, this is either exactly the same on paper as the standard V2, or just slightly tweaked. But I feel like I'm going crazy because when I hold this mouse and I align it, for whatever reason on my V2, I feel like there is a smidge more support, like right in this area here. And I almost feel like my hand sits a little bit lower on this one, and maybe I'm losing my mind. That is possible, but that is how it felt to me in the hand when I was just going back and forth between the two. But overall, it's an incredibly similar shape, and I think most people would be hard-pressed to notice a difference. I do have a pretty big, substantial complaint, though, I would say, on the V2, and that is that these side buttons are absolutely worse than they are in the standard V2. They feel much more flimsy. There is noticeable pre- and post-travel on these now. They're still good side buttons, especially by the standards of wireless mice, where wireless mice will often have just flimsy piece of crap side buttons. Like, you know, the Superlight, for example, is awful on that front. Like I honestly can't even believe the Superlight shipped for that price point with side buttons that bad. It just boggles the mind. But what do I mean when I say that? So first off, there's an inconsistency between the two buttons. This front button here, the one close to the clicks, is actually pretty good. Now, there is a little bit of post-travel when I push it in, but this one in general is actually quite solid. Mainly when you push it, though, you can kind of see that it bends in a certain direction. It doesn't go straight in, and that bugs me a little bit. But it's primarily the back button here, where this feels totally different than the front button. It's a much lighter actuation than this one. And you can see the button kind of tilts up or down or side to side. It just feels really flimsy. There's pre-travel. You may not be able to see it in the video very well, but you can actually push it in a little bit before it actuates, and then once it's in, it just keeps pushing into the shell. This does not happen on my standard DeathAdder V2. My standard DeathAdder V2 has just much better side buttons. It is possible this is just the unit that I received. I mean, I've had that happen more than you might think. You know, you think they all come off the line the same, but they don't for whatever reason. So, for example, I've had two EC2-C models, for example, and the scroll wheels are tensioned differently. The side buttons felt a little bit different, you know, the clicks felt slightly different, you know, so, and you know, you can go back and forth between the two you have and try it out. And I saw online forums, people were saying too that they had several copies, and they always come out a little bit different, but I'm really not pleased with this back side button on my unit. Because okay, I always complain about the positioning of these side buttons on the DeathAdder, but in terms of their quality, in terms of like pre and post travel, in terms of like how they feel to press, you know, with respect to are they good side buttons in that sense, they've always been very, very good. So one of these came out fine, and unfortunately one of them did not on this unit, which is pretty discouraging because I think that would bother me a lot if I'd spent $150 on this. I did not, because on Amazon they're kind of clearing storage now, it seems like, so they're $60 at this time, just because the V3 came out. Another thing I was disappointed by, I would say, is, so obviously this is not USB-C. This mouse is actually a few years old at this point, like a year or two old, something in that vein. So it'd be nice, but alas, it's not. But my bigger gripe is that the standard V2 came with, one, a longer cable than this. It doesn't actually ship with an especially long cable. And then this cable is like a stick. It reminds me of the Outset AX cable. It's not good. You would not want to play with this, it's a disappointment to me, because what I expected they would do was take their hyperspeed cable that they used on the standard DeathAdder V2, and use that type instead. And the reason why that matters to me is because sometimes you're going to have to use it wired, because you got to charge the mouse, but you want to play some games. Sometimes 2 years from now, the internal battery in this is going to be super decayed and it's not going to work great anymore. So at some point down the line, you're going to have to use the mouse with its cable. And in that sense, the Hyperspeed X is actually set to age better, because you can just keep replacing the batteries. So as long as the mechanical components hold out, that one works out. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how they did the DPI buttons here in comparison to how they do them on the Hyperspeed. So what advantage the X Hyperspeed model has over this one? One is that battery decay won't be a factor, because you can just buy new batteries and throw them in. Two is that it's possible to achieve a slightly lower weight, though I feel like not really pragmatically, because I'm one of those people who would actually want to put 2 batteries in the shell and not one super lightweight lithium-ion battery. That's just me. So I've talked in my previous video about, I really don't like this black bar here, and I don't like the way they've positioned the DPI buttons. What I would strongly prefer is for them to shrink this black bar so it's just the side of buttons and push it up against the wheel. The reason I want it up against the wheel is because if you're in gameplay, let's say you've bound this to a map in a game or whatever, or voice chat or whatever you bound it to. If you're in a game, you have to reach back to hit these. And so having them this far back, they're kind of uncomfortable to reach. But the other issue I find is the way I hold the mouse, where again, align thumb to the groove, align the mouse hump to the base of the fingers, rest your fingers down and all that jazz. You can kind of see that my finger here kind of overlaps. Like I can feel the black plastic bar with this finger. I hate that. I really don't like that. And that wasn't a problem on the Elite, for example, because those buttons, you didn't have this long black bar and they were pushed up against the scroll wheel. That is a problem on this. It's also not a problem on the X Hyperspeed. I do not own one, but I have used one before, because they move the buttons over here. My preference would actually be a hybrid of both of those two approaches. So first of all, I don't care about having 2 buttons here. I don't switch my DPI. Personally, I just leave it at a fixed value, and that's that. And they've already got a DPI switch button on the bottom. That's enough for me. So to me, I'm more concerned with ergonomic comfort in where can you place buttons where you can actually reach them comfortably during gameplay. If you have maybe one button that is 50% larger than this DPI button, and you just have that one button close to the wheel, and then maybe shift I'd actually be okay with, personally, with my hand size and grip style, with them shifting the wheel just a smidge further out. That's just my opinion. I think how it's positioned is fine, though. I'd rather that, because a bigger single button that's closer to the wheel, you could actually reach that relatively comfortably during gameplay. But this back button, I absolutely never use it, because it's so uncomfortable to do this. So why have it? I think that's the reason why other mice, like the Glorious Model D and things like that, they just got the one. Maybe also because it's cheaper to put in one button. But what about if the Hyperspeed X does it, where they have the button kind of over here? So I actually think that's a pretty good idea, but I almost feel like you would just want one bigger button on this tail end. And I say one instead of 2, because look at how your fingers lay here, right? If you have 2 buttons, if you have a button coming too far back, then your finger may touch that button. And again, I just don't think that's a comfortable prospect. In the same way that I don't like my finger here running over this black bar, I am worried about if you have 2 buttons and they go back too far, there is a reasonable chance that this finger is kind of going to overlap over one of them if you have especially wide hands and thick boy fingers. So that's why I say, you know what, throw one on here like you do on the X Hyperspeed, have one comfortable button here that's up against the wheel, and then you're left with kind of a scenario where you actually have 2 buttons that are reasonably comfortable to press, and there's no there's no chance of actually hitting the wrong one. There's no chance of like your fingers overlapping with them in uncomfortable ways. That's my take on it personally. The other advantage the X Hyperspeed has is they actually use a different kind of plastic for the shell, and it is better. It is a rougher, more nice feeling material to my perception, and there is a little bit of subtle texturing on this mouse, but it's very subtle and it's mostly just smooth feeling at this point. I like this more than perfectly smooth plastic though, like you'd see on an EC2. So I like that they do it at all. I still maintain my gripe that I've had for a long time, so about the side button positioning. So on the DeathAdder, first off, this back button is a little bit larger than this front one. I personally don't care for that. I'd rather they make two buttons that are exactly the same size. And then what I would like them to do is rotate them backwards around this hump so that the buttons actually sit closer to the mouse hump instead of being so far forward. And I'll tell you why that is. It's because when I hold the mouse with my grip style, how it's comfortable for me, where I you know, this kind of a grip essentially, where my thumb sits, it's very, very comfortable to hit this back button. It is not comfortable to reach this front button. And when I do reach that front button, it's almost like I have to shift my whole hand forward and in my whole grip, and it's not comfortable. It's never been comfortable. And I will say, I put to you, it is more, if you have to choose, it is more comfortable to shift the thumb. Let's say I was holding the mouse way up here. I never would, but let's just say hypothetically I was. It is more comfortable to shift the thumb back than forward because you can bend your thumb at the joint. Whereas if you have to move forward, your thumb only goes so far forward, and you have to just shift your entire grip, and it's not comfortable, and it really has always impeded. In my case, it's unlucky too, because this back button has a much weaker implementation on this unit than the front one in my case, so that's just tragic. But it is what it is. So I appreciate, for example, the G502, I love where they position those two side buttons. I think the Iron Claw does too, where they're much closer to the back. The EC2-C, I think those have basically flawlessly positioned side buttons where your thumb's like right in between the two and you can comfortably reach either one. The DeathAdder V2 at least had very high quality side buttons. It's just the positioning is wrong, and I don't like how they size them differently and things like that. The other issue I have with this shape that I kind of wish they would change, the DeathAdder for me has always been kind of the greatest of all time in terms of just raw comfort in the hand for the way I hold mice in my hand size, which is like 19.5 by 10.5 centimeters. But I do find occasionally my fingers sort of come off the end a little bit. And so on Zowie mice, like the EC2, they don't have this hard edge. They actually round this edge. And I like that a lot because it means if you are someone who happens to hold the mouse just super far forward where your hands are kind of coming off the end, it's a lot more comfortable to me having that rounded like that, because you don't feel the sharp edge kind of pushing into your fingers. And especially on smaller mice, that's relevant, like the EC2, which is why it's awesome they do it. What I wish they would do is actually just kind of extend the front. Don't change the shape, just extend the front just a smidge. And they've actually done that on the V3, in fairness. It's a slightly longer mouse. And then what they could do is, with that extra length, they could round off the flare and in how they connect it to the front panel under the clicks. And in that way, you can still keep the flare without having this hard edge. You know, it's one of the things I'm disappointed with the V3 is that they don't have the flare anymore, but they still have the hard edge. You know, they didn't round the edge off like they did on the EC2, which is just a nice detail on the Zowie mouse. Speaking of that, so the DeathAdder V3, you've probably seen a million reviews for it already. I used it for several hours. I don't own one because I honestly don't find it to be a more comfortable shape specifically for the type of grip style that I prefer. So if you are a claw gripper, I definitely find the V3 to be more comfortable. But I take issue with them calling it a DeathAdder because it is not a DeathAdder. It is Razer's attempt at kind of an EC 1.5 type mouse, which a lot of people will love, you know, and it's a great mouse for executing that. But for palm grip and for kind of relaxed fingertip grip, I think this mouse is more comfortable. I had the opportunity to try the V2 and the V3 just right next to each other, and you will notice. So okay, so the thing is that the V2, this is a wider shape. It's a wider feeling mouse in the hand. So if you have really wide hands and you like to palm mice, I think this is more comfortable. And this mouse has a more pronounced kind of back right support hump on it. Whereas there is this trend in the ergo space, which I just hate, where they are kind of taking designs and they're just flattening out the right side. And it's like, if I wanted a flat right side, I wouldn't get an ergo mouse. Like if you've seen the Rival 310, part of why that shape is so freaking awesome is they've got this massive back right support hump, and I love that. I don't mind so much actually personally when they smooth out the left side by comparison, because the problem is if you hold the mouse sufficiently far forward, your thumb doesn't really align correctly, and so that is less of a factor if you smoothen out the left side. And if you do, like if I make myself hold the mouse or my fingers kind of better in between the buttons, you see my thumb kind of doesn't align anymore, which isn't the most comfortable. So I think what they should have done is they should have branded the DeathAdder V3 either as a Mamba V2 or, you know, as some new mouse, because it just isn't a DeathAdder. It's great, mind you, but it isn't a DeathAdder. In general terms, I prefer the back half, the way that the mouse hump works, the width, the back right support hump. I prefer the height, actually, at this topmost point. I prefer all that on the V2 myself. I actually like the flare as well, and it's because, I mean, for starters, people seem to think it gets in the way. I have never found that to be the case, because your thumb just doesn't sit far enough forward to even interact with the flare on the left side. And on the right side, they've actually sort of flattened it out towards the bottom. So you can comfortably hold it pretty far forward without it getting in the way. And I actually find the way it wraps your fingers out, I like. I mean, call me crazy, but I actually like that. And then up top, if you have very thick fingers, and this is a problem I run into a lot of ergo mice, they're trying to be these jack-of-all-trade hybrids where you can hold it any way you want to, right? But I think a lot of them, because they want to be claw grip viable, they end up making a thinner mouse. I don't want a thin mouse. I want a wide boy mouse. And if anything, I find too many mice are just really thin for whatever reason. And I have large, thick fingers, so having these comfort grooves and this wide front end, I think it's really comfortable. I just wish they would lengthen it a smidge here and then round this connecting point. That's what I would like personally. Other than that, I've had no issue with the wireless implementation. I have heard that the sensor and the wireless implementation is even better on the new one. I don't need or care about the RGB. To me, it just seems like an inefficient use of battery resource when you have a wireless mouse. That's just my opinion. You can turn it off, but it won't save your RGB with the onboard profiles. So I believe you need Synapse for that, which has always boggled my mind. It's like, if you're going to have onboard profiles to source settings, why would you not include RGB settings in that? I mean, is it really that much of a big increase in file size or something in that vein? It doesn't. I don't really get it. Oh, the other thing is, obviously, because this is where the thing comes in, the connector on the standard V2, this foot comes all the way across. This little thing holds, this little compartment holds your dongle, the wireless dongle. I always like the detail that it actually says, you know, DeathAdder V2 Pro. It actually tells you the model number, and that's pretty awesome. It's a nice detail. But, you know, it's funny, I'm actually using this wired in the video because I'm charging it right now. I just realized that. But it is a great mouse. You know, I think the DeathAdder to me has always been what I would consider like a flawed masterpiece, in the sense that it is such a unique ergo that is a beautifully comfortable shape for specific grip types and hand sizes. But I call it flawed because it just has other issues. Like, I don't like how they've set up the DPI buttons on this one. I don't like how they've sized and positioned the side buttons. It is heavier than well, some other mice, but I think for a wireless mouse, I'm actually cool with a mouse that's 80 or 90 grams personally, but that's just my opinion. Some people want to go as light as possible, and that's all good. The dream would also be to get one where, you know, the coating shell and materials, whatever they did on the Superlight, because it feels great. Like it's like a rubber soft touch plastic, basically, I think that they used, and it's just the best coating I've ever seen. But I'll stop going on about it. But if you like the DeathAdder, and assuming you get a good unit for quality control, you know, I think it's a good shape, and it's a good time to buy one in the sense that, you know, they're kind of cleaning out inventory right now, and with the DeathAdder V3 so dramatically changing the shape, my concern is this is going to go the way of like the old Nagas with the wheels, where you're not going to be able to buy them anymore, and they're going to be hundreds of dollars years later. So they're super cheap right now, which is why I bought one. And who knows, at some point Razer might make like a DeathAdder Classic or something like that, which an updated DeathAdder with, you know, the old shape, and you know, that would be pretty neat. It's possible. It is a very popular shape, but that's what I think. So have a good one, guys. Oh, and it does support Bluetooth as well, which is a nice feature to have. I think they got rid of the switch on their V3, probably to bring weight down, if I had to guess, because then you have to cram less stuff in there, I would imagine. But anyway, thanks for your time, and have a good one, guys. Bye.